If you've ever recorded an instrument or a voice before, you've probably had some trouble dealing with noise. It could be room noise, preamp noise, a noisy environment when you're recording, your amplifier making a hiss sound, and many other noise sources. So usually what you do is you try to minimize the noise in your recording by recording in a quiet environment, building a recording booth, and also denoising the recording after it was recorded. In this video, we're going to do the exact opposite and gather as much noise as possible, and we're going to treat that noise as a musical instrument instead of the thing that we try to get rid of and minimize as much as possible. So what is noise? Noise to our ears is something that usually is atonal and is hard to perceive as musical. So to me, that would mean something that doesn't evolve over time in a meaningful tonal, rhythmic, or musical way. So you just get something that's either static or just completely random and hard to perceive tonally or rhythmically, or both. Noise usually accompanies a tonal sound when we're recording because we can't record in a perfect environment without capturing the noise that's around us and in the tools that we use to record. It could be the sound of the room that my voice is in, and it's also being picked up by the microphone as well as my voice. So there's a lot of ways to capture and record noise. So I broke them down into a few categories. Natural occurring noise. So this could be the room noise, the hum of my computer, or the sound of the fan speeding up when the computer is running a heavy video game. It could be the hiss of a guitar amp, the noise of a cassette recorder while it's running or recording or rewinding the tape, and such. Percussion as noise. So to my ears, percussion is very closely perceived to noise. It's very loud. It usually doesn't have a very tonal sound. But the main difference is that we play percussion with rhythmic intention. So we try to make a rhythm and a pattern when playing these instruments. For example, which makes it sound like an instrument and perceived as musical to our ears. So my goal was to try and play percussion in the most random, unmusical, unrhythmical way that I possibly could. Usually it would mean just like scraping the percussion over and over, for example, to try and create textures that are very similar to noise, but also have the tonal timbre characteristics of percussion. Overblowing and underblowing wind instruments is also a great way to get noise because you don't get an accurate pitched tone usually. You just get a bunch of weird stuff like which can be perceived as noise and pretty annoying to your neighbors as well. I also have a few whistles that are pretty much atonal, like this one sort of sounds like an owl. And this one, when you fill it with water, it sounds kind of like tiny birds as you blow into it. It's really cute. or this whistle that just sounds like a train. Synthesizer noise. So synthesizers can also generate noise. Most commonly, you probably know white noise and pink noise, and maybe brown or red or blue noise, which are just like either a very low pass version of white noise or a very high pass version of white noise. And I've also used filters and very low pitched wavetables to try and create noise out of these as well. In addition to that, pushing effects to their extremes can also generate noise. Like for example, stacking a bunch of phasers on top of each other can create a very cool sound. And effects like OTT, which is a very dramatic multiband compression, can also accentuate tiny noisy sounds that you wouldn't have heard otherwise in digital synthesizers. Tonal noise. So I've taken inspiration from instruments like the Koshi windchimes, which are windchimes that are tuned to a specific key. And they sound very beautiful, but the thing is, since it's a wind chime, it usually is played by the wind, and the wind is random. So you get random strokes of notes at a random order that's not perceived as too musical and intentional. So it sort of sounds like a background noise, a very pleasant one, but still a background noise. So I've taken inspiration from the Koshi wind chimes, and I've tried to take tonal instruments like my electric guitar and make it as random and imperceptible musically, at least as a pattern, as possible. So I've used shakers to gently strum the guitar strings to create random movement in the guitar. And I've also used my electric toothbrush to excite the guitar strings, which also created a bunch of really weird resonant sounds out of the electric guitar that you wouldn't really be able to make by just playing it intentionally or unintentionally. So as you can hear, there are a lot of ways to capture noise, and now after we've recorded all of them, let's try and make it musical. Making a noise sound musical can mean a lot of different things, but to me, I think it means making it more perceptible to our brain. So I've treated every single noise recording as the single most important instrument in a song, something that needs to be interesting and really grab your ears when you're listening to it. It could be making it tonal, it could be making it rhythmic in a pattern that's perceptible to our brain and not too chaotic. Basically turning it from a random mess into a phrase that we can process and repeat in our brain. So I've taken all of the samples that we recorded and I've started making them musical in a bunch of sound design methods. Resonators. Resonators as an effect is a bunch of oscillators that are tuned to a specific note and frequency, and when they are excited by incoming audio, so when incoming audio is playing that frequency, they are going to open up and play that note, that tone. So the cool thing about resonators is that they are dynamic and react to what's being fed into them, what excites them, and this is the noise that we recorded. So if the noise changes dynamically, the resonators are going to open up and close dynamically following that noise. If a noisy sample has frequency content at 440 Hz and we have a resonator tuned to A4, which is 440 Hz, it's going to play that oscillator when the noise hits that frequency. My best example for this dynamic sound that you get is these cassette recorder stutters and clicks. When they excite the resonators, you get a very clicky and plucky violin sort of sound. Retune effects like pitch map and chroma. This sort of effect is sort of like a polyphonic autotune for frequencies. So what it does is when it detects a frequency that isn't in the key or notes that you chose to retune to, it's going to move that frequency to an adjacent frequency that's in tune. This can really helped me create very tonal sounds. But the downside of that is that it's going to blur the sound, and that usually chroma and these sort of plugins tend to all sound the same if you add too much of them to a sound, because they just blur it out a bit too much. So my best way to use these was to take very static noises, like for example a preamp noise or white noise or any other synthesizer noise that isn't moving, and put it through chroma, which would then not blur the transients, since there aren't a lot of transients in a static sort of sound, but still give me a very tuned and musical result. Convolution Reverb. Convolution Reverb is applying an impulse response on top of your incoming audio, usually to create a reverbed out sound. So I used it with tuned hang drum samples and Temperance by Eventide, which is a tuned reverb plugin to create tuned impulse responses that sort of slightly blur out the sound like a traditional reverb would, but also accentuate specific notes and frequencies in it, creating a tonal washy sound. EQ. By taking specific frequencies that correspond to pitches and boosting them a lot using very narrow peak EQ curves, I was able to boost certain frequencies that did exist in the original noise sample, but they weren't loud enough to be perceived as tonal. As I've said before, usually noise accompanies a tonal recording. So if you boost very specific tones of a noise, you sort of bring out the tonal part a lot more and make it perceptible to our brain as something tonal and not noisy. Feedback. So when delay is used at very short time intervals and at a very high feedback rate, which just means feeding back the delay line into the input of the delay line, you get a tuned, very ringy, very loud sort of sound. It sounds kind of like your PC is crashing. And there's a very cool plugin by Minimal Audio called Rift Feedback, which allows you to tune the delay times to pitches. So you can set the delay time to be at, for example, 20 milliseconds, which would correspond to a specific pitch. And that way you can create tuned feedback of your noise. So I've used either one of these or a couple of these in parallel to create chords out of noise signal and just very feedbacked and sort of distorted sound. Filters. By tuning filters with resonant peaks like band passes or comb filters to specific notes, you can enhance tonality in an incoming noise signal. I paired this method with slightly randomized MIDI sequencing with a plugin called Harmony Bloom that allowed me to sequence notes in and out of these tuned filters to create very moving resonant sounds. Modal Synthesis Excitement. Pigments has a modal synthesis oscillator, which allows you to control and excite resonators. But the cool thing is that you can shape the resonators to be of different types, like string or beam, and then also shape their frequency response. And what I did is I fed the incoming noise into these resonators to excite them. And that way the noise basically controlled the dynamic playing of these resonators. So it's a very similar sound to the resonator, but with a lot more control and granularity over the sound that the resonators are playing. Since some of the sounds that I recorded were already tonal, I've decided to take these sounds the other way around and try and make them noisier. So I've used extreme pulse stretching and extreme denoising just to make it a lot noisier and introduce a lot of digital artifacts into the sound. Naturally, I also took some of these sounds into my synthesizers to try and make some presets out of them as well. So this first preset is a combination of a sample and a supersaw, which gives you a very fragile and fluttery sort of sound from the artifact of the sample. This next preset is a combination of a sine wave with some noise. This next preset sounds like this. So it's combining a wavetable that's moving really fast and sounds very clicky and stuttery with a saw. This preset is the same as the previous one, but it's a short swell that's reactive to how loud you play the notes. And there's also some ambience, which introduces a very flangey sort of sound. So this preset is based on a wavetable. It sounds like this. So the wavetable is looping really, really fast. And it creates this nice effect when you play different notes. And there's some nice effects. There's a delay and a very short reverb. And this is a simpler version of that patch. It's a polyphonic patch. And it's just a wavetable with the same effects. And this final patch is taking the bird whistle noises and it's playing them really, really slowly and with a spectral gate, so you only get like the high shimmery frequencies, and then it's pairing it with square saw hybrid, and there's also a cutoff knob. And the water macro makes it sound more flangy. All it does is basically remove the randomness from the unison voices, so they all start from the same position, creating that very flangy sort of sound. All of these presets are also available as a bunch of one-shots. So in case you don't have Serum or Pigments, you can also get them as well. So after sound design and post-processing, I've had the following sounds. I'm really happy with the results of this experiment. It feels very liberating to not fear noise, but to actually chase it, and the process of making it musical has been very interesting and unique. Now the result is a folder full of tonal noises that I can use to layer in my songs, and also a folder full of the original noises for texture and background stuff as well. If you'd like, you can download all of the samples and presets made in this video, including the dry noise recordings, the musical noise samples, and the sound design samples and presets in my Patreon under the paid membership option. Or instead, you can get free sampler with the free membership instead. Thanks for watching this video, and let me know in the comments what I should sample next.